Hello, everybody, and welcome to This is Surveying. I'm your host, Nina Young, and I'm also the founder of Surveyors UK and the Surveying Room. Today's guest is Richard Sexton. Richard is the commercial director for Houzecheck, which is a large surveying and valuation firm in the UK. And Houzecheck has a very heavy focus on prop tech in the profession. So, without further ado, welcome, Richard.
Hi, Nina. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. So, as with all guests that we have on the show, what would be helpful to the listeners is to understand a bit about your background and sort of how that's brought you to where you are today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I don't know if this is blasphemy, but I'm not actually a surveyor, so I should admit to that first of all. But over the years, I've learned to speak surveyorese, if there is such a language. But I've had a long and checkered career around property, I guess. Prior to coming into the property sector, I was in sales. And then in 1991, I joined a business called GA Property Services back in the day. And they ultimately, and I was just kind of an admin assistant processing valuation instructions. And over a series of years, that business morphed into what became eServe, part of the LSL group. And there were some interesting highlights, you might call them, along the way. So when I joined 1991, I think that was the first property crash that we experienced. So it was all a bit depressing. Lots of repossession valuations. And then that happened again in 2008, probably for different reasons, with the subprime crash. And I was musing on it earlier on. There were probably 3 million mortgage valuations, I reckon, a year at that time. But also probably not sustainable. So that was an interesting point. We actually did a management buyout of the business, the whole LSL business, in 2007. Which turned out to be not great timing because of the crash that happened about 12 months later. So we lost about 90% of the value of the company. So great timing, and then that gradually recovered. And LSL today is a highly successful business. I was with eServe when the horrible COVID situation arose, and that was interesting because we had to quickly pivot because we were still very focused and still are very focused in eServe on lender servicing. But of course, the lockdown meant we couldn't actually go out and visit any properties. So we had to very quickly pivot and develop what people would now call desktops. Desktops were around at the time, but not in any way as penetrated into the market as they are now. So we had to quickly, almost overnight, come up with a proposition that was accurate and that the lenders trusted, and obviously protected our surveyors and the customers who were, scared actually about having people come into their property, and the desktop approach and proposition is kind of, not many lenders went back from that approach, and in fact they've probably increased their use of desktops, so that's become a permanent part of the market. So I had a great.
So on that point though, Richard, the desktop, it's something I hear a lot about. Has it? I mean, is it? What are your thoughts as how it might go? Because I think a lot of people are looking at their business models and the desktop valuation, and it feels like there's just going to be a push for desktop because of many reasons, but also cost. What's your thoughts with it?
I completely agree with that, and we've kind of made our own bed in some respects. Desktops are far more accurate now than perhaps they were to begin with. There's far more data around that you can rely on, but there's a place for them. I don't think they're going to be 100% of the market, and nor should they be. But the major driver for many corporate valuers, of course, is the lender market, and lenders want things which are safe. Number one, that's the most important, but also cheap, or cheaper, should we say, and fast. And they also don't want, they want to minimize the impact on their customers. So it's great if they can make a loan based on a desktop that they're confident in, and not disturb their customer and make them take the day off. I think they will go for it, and some of the major lenders are kind of leading on that, and I think that penetration will only continue, along with kind of the use of AVMs as well. So I think the segmentation of the market will be, particularly for mortgage lending, that it will be the more complex types of loan and property where the kind of residential valuer ends up in terms of physical inspections. But if a lender is comfortable that they can use a desktop or an AVM, they will. It's kind of an economic reality. So I think diversification for surveyors or surveyors in that market is a good idea. I'm with Houzecheck now, which is almost entirely focused on private surveys. So
Okay.
we're not exposed to that lender sector at the moment. And I think private surveys is an obvious home for surveyors who might see their kind of lender work shrinking over the next
Yeah.
couple of years. I mean, people have predicted it for a while, but it does feel like it's accelerated as a trend now.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to that, actually, that point around sort of the valuation, the corporates that tend to dominate
Hmm.
in the marketplace. You've obviously spent a long time, by the sounds of it, in the sort of the corporate
Hmm.
environment. Now, you're more in a more an independent, you would say,
Correct.
firm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of are the differences, the upsides, the downsides? Because there's always a lot of these debates that go on for trainees and newbies going into the profession and,
Yeah.
just generally opinions, but I'd be interested to know your insights.
Yeah, so there's a big difference between the two models. If you talk about corporate and employed and independent and self-employed, and there's a bit of a Venn diagram there, but I think people know what I mean. So, and I think there's room for both for surveyors trying to choose their path. So, if you work for a corporate business, you have certainty over your income, which is important, particularly in the early days for graduates, and that's where a lot of graduates tend to graduate towards or gravitate towards, I should say. And I guess to balance that against the self-employed independent model, there's no cap on your earnings. So if you want to work as hard as you want to work, then you're probably able to earn more on a self-employed model. But then there are pros and cons again, because from a PI perspective and risk perspective, a corporate employer will cover your PI for you, whereas you are personally taking the risk if you're a self-employed individual. If you're a graduate, again, I'd say the corporates are the right home to consider, because from a development point of view, you'll get great support. I've seen, hundreds of ASOC RICS valuers come through the system in eServe and in other peer organizations, and they get really first class training and they get really first class support and mentoring that doesn't exist kind of so much on the other side of the fence. So you're responsible for your own development and your own CPD, and your organization, I'm sure, is going to be helping with that kind of thing. Corporates and employed, your business development is done for you, so you don't need to worry about that too much, and your admin is done for you. If you're a more gregarious individual and you enjoy, talking to your local estate agent and other prospective customers, then self-employed is the way to go. I think what we see, what I think I see is people probably first part of their career they're in a employed corporate model, and then when the whole kind of work-life balance becomes more important, kids and getting older, which unfortunately we all are, we and certainly in Houzecheck we see people at that stage come to us and say, you know what, I'd like to work 3 days a week, and I'd like to do X number of jobs a day. So this is a kind of more attractive option for me. But there's room for both ultimately.
Sounds like there's a bit of a trade-off, because one of the things I hear within sort of some of the corporate environments is that it can be very long hours.
Hmm.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that compared to, like you say, you mentioned the work-life balance, but also there's the other side to it, as in running your own business. You're not just
Hmm.
doing the surveying, you're running your business as well. So there is a lot to that. So sometimes that work-life balance can is achievable, but I think,
Hmm.
that there has to be some sort of caveats in that you are still having to do everything else that you're required to do to run a business and
Correct. And
get the leads.
if you work for a corporate, they will be very clear their expectations of you, and that will be a
Mm.
certain number of jobs in a certain area, the 24/7 or 5 days a week, versus the self-employed model where you kind of set your own hours. the employed model, all those things you've just talked about, the admin is taken care of for you. So I think there's probably different times in surveyors' careers when both of those models kind of appeal for different reasons.
Mm, okay. So obviously now you're with Houzecheck. That is how big is the actual Houzecheck firm?
Yeah, also we're pretty significant. We cover all of England and Wales. Our model is a consultant model, so a self-employed model. And we've probably got about 150 ladies and gentlemen on our books, and they work a range of hours. So some will give us half a day and do their own private work as well. And I think we do have a surveyor that works 6 days a week, which is probably even more than you would if you were working for a corporate. But they're making lots. They're making lots of money, so that's their choice. So probably 150 surveyors on the books, but actively. In a given month, maybe 90 to 100 we'll work with, and that's their choice. They tell us when they want to work and when they don't, so they control their own diaries, which appeals. But Houzecheck's growing pretty rapidly. We got some private equity investment end of last year, so our goal is kind of double the number of surveyors and double the income and the turnover and all those kind of things. So it's a really exciting journey.
Yeah, and touching also about tech. You said, we've discussed before that Houzecheck is very much in the prop tech space. Can you talk to me more about that?
Well, you might have heard of our secret sauce,
I
which is
yes,
what we like to describe our kind of overall proposition as.
yeah.
Yeah, to be serious, part of that secret sauce is our tech proposition. One of the advantages of only working on private work is that you're not necessarily beholden to the kind of legacy platforms that you have to work with if you want lender work. You definitely need Landmark Quest and or Cotality, as I think it's called now. We've had the luxury of developing our own in-house system, and it's kind of been designed by some very clever techie colleagues of mine, but also by surveyors. So it's kind of designed by surveyors for surveyors, and it does a really good job of assisting them in producing private surveys, which is kind of our bread and butter. Um, so it's outside of those big ecosystems, and again, we kind of it's in our gift to evolve that as we see fit. Excuse me. So we can incorporate updates and new features pretty quickly. I suspect we'll talk about AI at some point, but like everybody else,
Oh, you read my mind. I was
well,
just about to go into that.
I think AI is kind of, it's one of those, everybody's talking about it. I'm not sure everybody's doing it in a way that
Yeah, I
they
agree.
suggest they do. So I think it's got something to run, but we're using it to audit our reports for quality.
Oh,
So
right.
for example, it will machine read the report and offer suggestions about where more clarity can be introduced. And I think that the next stage of that is to kind of lead the surveyor, not completely tell the surveyor what he should be writing, but if you identify a certain defect, it might point you to say, okay, if you've got a pagoda roof, this is my impression of a surveyor now, you might think you've got a wall tie failure, and the system should be able to tell you that, to go and look for that kind of particular defect. So I think that's where it's going, but I think it's a little bit overblown in terms of it being the kind of be all and end all of everything at the moment. It's a tool, not a it's a tool, not a replacement for the surveyor's knowledge.
That's it, and there's a lot of talk around that, and I agree. It's not a replacement, but what it can do and what it will be able to do is provide, I think, provide more insight and more freeing up the actual surveyor to do the surveying. As
Yeah,
in, that's what they
yeah.
do, the eyes and ears, they're looking at the defects, they're following the trail, they're, giving their own insights and experience on
Mhm.
something. Whereas AI is good, but it needs to be trained on data, and it needs a
Mhm.
lot of data. And you could give it an image and you could say, what is this? Is this rise and damp? And without all the context, all the nuance around it,
Yeah.
all the information it needs, it's not going to be able to come to the correctly, the survey is always going to have to be there to interpret the data, I think.
I think so, and I think that the phrase I've heard, I'm not a tech expert, as you've probably worked out, but it can hallucinate, can't it,
Oh,
AI?
yeah.
So if you ask it the wrong question, it'll give you the wrong answer. But your point about data analysis is a very valid one. If you can feed in 10,000, 100,000 reports, it can at least direct you to say, well, when people found this, then it might be that. Not it is that. You need to have a look at it. But I went to the doctor's the other day for a very minor thing, and the doctor switched his AI assistant on, and it diagnosed the problem before the doctor did. And I looked at it, I
Really?
said, "Yep, that's what it is. That's what it is." So kind of that's a
Wow.
use. But the doctor still made the final decision. So that's the
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. You still need the expert at the end. And I think and I don't know if it's something that y you're working on or it's something you've
Mhm,
looked at is around sort of the visual, data capture, with the taking an image and then
mhm.
interpreting that data as you go around a property. I've noticed there's lots of things that are springing up across surveying, lots of solutions, and I think some of them will stick, and I think some of them will probably die
Yeah,
off.
yeah. I think at one point, yeah, I completely agree with you. At one point, probably 10 years ago, a number of people, including the company I work for, were exploring drones because they seemed like they would be a great idea. But what people forgot about was that, that's great if you're surveying Buckingham Palace or a mansion in the Cotswolds. It's not a great idea to go down one Acacia Avenue because you might chop someone's head off with a with a propeller. So, great idea, but the implementation is kind of the reality of it. So, I think what you could see as well, and I know people are kind of exploring this, is if you think about when you take your car to the garage, they'll sometimes send you a report to say we've got the car up on the ramps and here's the problem with your exhaust or your tires. And I think that's probably a sensible way forward with technology. And whether AI can actually interpret the image and then give a report, that's kind of another step forwards. But customer care and sort of customer experience is where I think AI and technology can really make a difference and help surveyors, not replace surveyors.
Because it's interesting, the auditing thing. Is that used as a sort of quality control from your perspective? Is it sort of are reports selected at random or, how does the auditing sort of
Yeah.
work?
Well, I think the advantage of technology and AI is it's a very low cost approach. So you can afford to do it on all reports. So that's what we do. And I think it's twofold. It is an audit to check quality, but it's also a feedback loop to say to surveyors, look, you always score lower on this section about roofs, for example. Maybe we can improve the way you report on roofs so there's more clarity. So it's not a stick per se. It's a way of feeding that back to the surveyor so that over time their reporting becomes clearer. Ultimately, surveying's about communicating, isn't it? So the better you are at communicating, the better surveyor you are as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that's just sprung to mind because it's quite a recent topic, a recent subject, and I don't know if what's your opinion on this, is regards to talking about the legislation around upfront surveys,
Hmm.
upfront condition surveys. I don't know a lot about it myself personally. Is that something that? What are your thoughts on that, or what you're hearing at the moment
Yeah.
with
So I was around, unfortunately, when they tried this last time, which was called HIPS.
home
Uh,
inspection packs? Is that
Correct,
right?
and
Yeah.
it's pretty much the same thing. And then it was pulled at the last minute, I think, for political reasons. Interestingly, because they were worried about the additional cost for the vendor, whereas now the justification or part of it is that it's going to save the vendor cost. So you go figure which one is true. But I did spend a year of my life talking to this whole new breed of potential clients called HIP providers. So these companies sprung up, and we're all going to make lots of money, and then overnight it was cancelled. So I think it's an improvement. I think it will help introduce more information earlier in the process. Is going to be good for everybody. I think for the surveying industry, it's a fantastic opportunity, especially in the context of what we said about kind of lender work falling away. This could be to some extent the savior of the industry. So I think in general terms, surveyors should be supportive of it. My memory is that there was a kind of race to the bottom to some extent on fees. So whoever quoted the lowest
Yeah.
fee was going to get all the work. So I think we should try and resist that temptation as an industry if we can. And it's not perfect, it's the closest. model you can look at is the Scottish model, where you need a condition report before you can market. And there's some rightful criticism about that. That if you're a surveyor and you're relying on an estate agent or a solicitor, as it usually is in Scotland, to feed you work, how objective are you in your reporting? And I'm sure all Scottish surveyors say they're absolutely objective, but you can imagine a scenario where there's some kind of backwards pressure placed on surveyors to be, let's say, flattering about a property or less damning about a property. So
Yeah.
that those kind of kinks need to be ironed out. But I think the Houzecheck and me personally, I think very supportive of the concept, and I think the industry should be as well.
Yeah, I've recently been at the Sava residential surveying event, which you were at as well, and I spoke to a few surveyors, and some of them were very concerned about it. And I think it comes down to, with a lot of the smaller independents
Hmm.
that are concerned that it would go down the race to the bottom model,
Hmm.
cheap, churn, fast.
Yeah.
And yet you've got some amazing surveyors who pride themselves on the quality and the depth of work
Hmm.
that they do. And I think that's probably where that fear comes from, is the
Yeah.
pricing, is something like that. I can see the big upside as well, is like suddenly every property needs a survey. It's like,
Hmm.
a huge proportion,
Yeah.
the majority don't get the surveys. So in a way, it will increase the volume of surveys. However, it's the pricing and
Yeah, I think you can pick your number, but people say between 10 and 20% of purchasers get a survey, which is terrible when it's the most
Mm.
expensive purchase you're likely to make in your life. And if you're going to buy a second-hand car, many people get an or an RAC survey,
Yeah,
but
inspection. Yeah.
you don't bother with a house because there's a misunderstanding that the lender's mortgage valuation is one for you, which it's not. It's for the lender, and two is a condition report, which it's not. It's about can I lend this much money to this person? But there's a great misunderstanding about that. So I think more private surveys commercially is great for the industry, but also from a available information point of view is also a really good idea. We did some calculations the other day that it could be sort of 500 million pounds worth of fees, pick your number, but it could be a whole new industry and a whole new source of business for surveyors that will hopefully encourage new entrants into the industry and keep it vibrant.
Mm. I think anything that does that is a good thing, to be honest.
Completely agree.
I
Completely
think
agree.
we have a big challenge there with residential surveying and getting new talent in, and I think if there is that opportunity for a big market, it will drive that. It will drive that need
Yeah, yeah.
and those
But
careers.
Well, I think your fear for the smaller players is legitimate, and I think what happened last time was that very quickly the providers, be it the legal providers, surveyors, and other stakeholders, started to aggregate either formally by buying each other out, or informally into kind of loose alliances, and I could see that happening again, and finding a safe haven, if you like, if you're the local independent surveyor, might be a good idea.
Okay. So I think one of the other topics that is always on the front and foremost of surveyors' minds is insurance, professional indemnity insurance. What are your sort of experiences and thoughts on the current state of the market at the moment with insurance? Because I've heard lots of, over the past few years, horror stories about premiums increasing significantly. Where are we kind of now with it, would you say?
So yeah, I can only speak from direct experience.
Yeah, sure.
So what happened was, after 2008, 2009, the amount of claims related to subprime lending, and that really spooked insurers. So everybody's premiums went up, and there were lots of claims made and lots of claims settled, and that forced a lot of people out of the market simply because they couldn't afford the insurance premium. What has happened since then, I think, looking at the industry as a whole, is that valuation claims have dropped dramatically, partly because a rising property market kind of if you like, hides any errors because it doesn't matter as long as the lender can get his money back, and that's where most of the claims come from. So I think that valuation related claims are probably at an all-time low. And what we see is defect claims related to home buyers reports, building surveys, where just a defect has not been picked up, and that's what insurance is there to do. So I think in general terms, it's a lot cheaper than it has been. But I think the other effect that is very unfair, but definitely happens, is next time there's a hurricane in the Caribbean, the premium gets loaded onto everybody else, regardless of the fact that it's something completely different. The insurers have to recover it somehow. And I'm using that as an extreme example, but they're not discrete areas of insurance. The insurance company needs to make money, so they'll recover their losses however they can, realistically. So I think it's probably more benign than it's been for 15 or so years. If we hit a property downturn, you'd see the premiums probably rising up very, very quickly, and that will then potentially drive some firms out of business. There was a period, again, probably 3 or 4 years ago, where insurers were happy, inverted commas, to continue insuring surveyors or surveying firms, but only if they did not undertake valuation work specifically for lenders, because that objectively, and it's not a criticism of lenders because they've got their own business model, is where most of the claims came from in that last 15-year period.
Yeah, a lot of surveys I know residential, they stopped valuation work
Yeah.
literally altogether because of
Yeah.
the premiums was the biggest, and the
Yeah.
exposure
Yeah.
was
I completely
really
agree.
and it's extremely challenging for small firms, so
Yes.
to justify the cost.
Agreed.
So going back to Houzecheck, you mentioned your business model. Is it right that so basically you're working with surveyors who've already got their own businesses, and
Hmm.
they will partner with you,
Yes.
and you will then help generate the business, the leads? Do you do all the booking for them? Sort of how does that work?
Yeah, it's excuse me, it's a very flexible model. So you can choose the amount of days you work for us, the amount of jobs that you do for us. Some of our surveying partners only work for us, more or less. Some of them have their own businesses. Some of them are actually small practices. So ABC surveyors might have 4 or 5 surveyors, but receive some work for us. The attraction, I think, of Houzecheck is that, yes, we pick up all of the admin. So we do the business development. That's kind of one of my jobs. We go out and find partners. We generate a lot of private survey leads through our own kind of online activity as well. Lots of people do that. But we're generating the work on behalf of our surveyor network. We do the booking, we issue the terms and conditions, we do the billing. So it is a very light touch approach if you really just want to do the surveying bit, which is the interesting bit for lots of people in the industry. So it works very well for that category of individual. Probably without making a sweeping judgment, we're probably our network is people who are probably in the, on average, latter half of their career rather than the first half of their career, for all the reasons we talked about earlier on in terms of work-life balance. But we also give them the software, so we give them the software for free to produce the reports. If they want to use the software for their own work, they can. We don't restrict that. There's a
All
very
right, okay.
very small admin charge for that if they want to do it. But the fact that a lot of our surveyors do that tells me it's an interesting piece of software that they find makes their life easier.
Okay, okay. So, before we end our chat today, is there anything else that you want to share with people listening? Anything about residential surveying generally, the market, anything like that?
Well, I I think if you went back 15, 20 years, people would often say to me, because I'm getting old, my son or my daughter's coming out of university, should they become a surveyor? And I
All
would,
right, yeah.
I would usually say, oh, it's hard work. It's hard work, and you're gonna give you a pound of flesh, etc., etc. So think about it very carefully. And it was probably a bit of an undervalued profession then. I think the opposite is true now. I think it's a great, vibrant profession to go into. The options or the career paths ahead of you are kind of wider than they ever have been before. And if you're into property, I think it's a fantastic choice to make. So and you can earn quite a lot of money. That's not the be all and end all, but there are not many careers where you can leave university and start earning the sort of money that you can earn as a surveyor. So I've probably switched my position 100%. So yeah, let's keep surveying going.
Excellent. I like that. Positive. We like positivity. I mean, I must admit, I agree. It's an incredible profession, and there are so many opportunities out there
Hmm.
for at all ages as well. So you don't just have to be, coming out of university to do surveying.
No, yeah,
That's
and
what I like about this.
I've talked about residential surveying, but I know your site and your proposition is far wider than that, and so I'm often a bit blinkered in my perspective on things. But I'm sure people visiting your site will see the kind of rich variety of options available to them, and I applaud you for what you're doing with your site. I think it's going to be fantastic.
Thank you, Richard. We're getting there. We're getting there with it. I'm excited to see you in it as well when we open the doors. It'd be great.
We'll be there, I promise.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. Really enjoyed our conversation. I think there's some really insightful things that you've shared with people today.
Thank you. Thanks
If
for
there's
your
anyone
time.
that wants to get in touch with either you or where should they go to? We will include some details in the show notes so people know
Yeah,
where contact
so
details.
you can find me on our website, which is Houzecheck with a Z, Houze check.com. My email address is richard.sexton@houzecheck.com. And yeah, make contact, and I'll be very happy to chat to anybody about anything because I can't
About
stop
anything.
talking. I can't stop talking.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for today, Richard.
Thanks, Nina.
Thank you.